Israel and the United States have been fighting side by side throughout the war in Iran in a strategic and military cooperation that's truly unmatched in American history. Released audio recording of Israeli and American pilots coordinating an attack really epitomized that relationship.
Mobile 97. Go for 97. It is a great honor for us to fight with you. You're doing a great job.
Thank you very much. Likewise, gentlemen. Please be safe out there. Strike hard. See ya.
Of course, the Israelis have their own reasons for wanting to be free of the Islamic regime in Iran, which has vowed to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. That's not why we're at war. We're ensuring that our grandchildren don't have to face off against a nuclear Iran. We're relieving China of 20% of its oil supply to give the president a massive leg up in trade negotiations with Xi Jinping and to remove the threat of China taking Taiwan. We're revealing our adversaries, China and Russia, as paper tigers, unwilling to send more than thoughts and prayers to aid Iran. And we're destroying the fiction of a multipolar world. We're becoming not just energy independent, but energy dominant. It's true gas prices are up, but they are still lower than they were under Biden, thanks to Trump's monumental efforts, which made us a net exporter of petroleum and the world's largest exporter of natural gas. The U.S. is back as the world's only superpower. No wonder 90% of MAGA and 85% of Republicans back the president's war in Iran. But you wouldn't know that from the online discourse. On Twitter, you'll find Democrats and far-right isolationists braying about Israel dragging us into their war and a big MAGA divide over Iran. It's nonsense. Here to discuss is John Spencer, Chair of War Studies at the Madison Policy Forum and Executive Director of the Urban Warfare Institute, and Tim Pool, political commentator and host of Timcast, one of, I believe, the most widely streamed news shows online. Welcome to you both. John, I want to start with you. The media wants us to believe that this war is an unmitigated disaster, that Iran now controls the Strait of Hormuz, that Trump didn't plan for this. Insane, as if. What's the reality of the status of the war right now, and how do we take back control of the Strait of Hormuz?
Sure. So thanks for having me, Batya. A lot of that, like to think that the Pentagon doesn't plan, it's just ridiculous. The operation is going better than expected, overwhelming, exceedingly, I don't know what word to use. As of this morning, 16,000 targets, 90% of ballistic missiles stopped, 95% of the drones. Pretty soon, Iran won't have a Navy, an Air Force. Its political leaders are hiding like rats in holes, doing a weekend by Bernie messages out there. From a military perspective of all the goals, and I really want to address this, the fake news media keeps inferring what the goals are rather than listening to our leadership, the president, the secretary of war, every day state what the military objectives are in this campaign. And like you said, this is about a new Middle East, a new strength through peace or peace through strength operation that will, I have teenage children, will make it so that my children don't have to go fight Islamic regime proxies all across the Middle East like I had to.
Tim, you're one of the people I go to often because you can always cut through the nonsense, whether it's in the mainstream media or in the more kind of podcast online space. What are you hearing, especially from young people, in terms of how the war is being perceived?
Well, unfortunately, it's largely being perceived negatively. There are a lot of people saying that, Donald Trump campaigned on no new wars. And I don't come on my show and tell people what they think should or should not be in terms of their opinions on the morality of these things. But one thing I find deeply challenging is the narrative as to why we are engaged in this war, particularly among young people and in social media circles, is incorrect. And as you've already mentioned, there are a lot of people that immediately say this is Israel's ideological war that is pulling the United States into it. They're forcing us into it. But this is quite simply, and I think if the Trump administration really laid into the oil issue here, you might actually get people to accept it. I think one of the mistakes being made is trying to simplify the moral issues around this conflict. Iran potentially being a nuclear power could wipe out Israel, but it could also destabilize the region in general. And all of that's true. But I think the very simple reason for this is they're disrupting oil trade, a large portion of it. And I don't believe that we should sit by, I mean, we as in the world, and allow a single nation to disrupt 20% of oil and gas trade among peaceful, cooperating nations that want to trade oil. Now, again, that doesn't mean I think we should or should not be involved in whatever this war is. But I think if Trump and the administration came out and told the American people, gas prices will come down if we can get cooperation in the region, but Iran is the principal aggressor disrupting this trade. And mining the Strait of Hormuz means everyone is going to suffer because we're looking at a large crink in our oil supply. Of course, you try to simplify it for the average person. And of course, social media companies, algorithms are going to promote simpler, more rage-baiting narratives. And then you end up with many people generally misunderstanding what this is really about. And although I would say it's fair, and you'll see a lot of people mention that Israel does have their own motivations for this war, namely Iran is funding militia groups, they're funding violence, Hamas, Hezbollah, et cetera. There's still an overlap between U.S. interests in securing the Strait of Hormuz and oil trade from the Gulf region and what Israel's looking to do. So I don't view this as we are doing what Israel wants. I would say there's an alignment there for different reasons. Unfortunately, for young people, they're only getting the Israel bad narrative.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think our interests with Israel are very much aligned, but they're not identical. I think Israel would like a much deeper-seated regime change, and it seems to me the president is completely not on board with that. He wants more of what we did in Venezuela. Do you agree, John?
I mean, of the possible alternatives, of course, that would be ideal. Again, American interests to change the behavior of this 47-year, and it coincidence aligns to the 47th president, 47-year war. It is not starting a regime change war. It's ending a forever war. And those economic ties that this one nation was holding a gun to the head of global economy, not under President Trump's watch.
Tim, I wonder if this wave of Islamist terrorism that we've seen in March has an impact on the conversation among young people. What do you think?
Well, I would say I hope so. And an interesting thing you brought up, because I was watching a little bit of your show earlier. It's not all about Iran. It's being largely framed by many people as that this Islamic terror is just pure retaliation for Iran. But if you look at New York, for instance, that was purely just Islamic, that was attacking anti-Islam protesters who were peaceful, by the way, whether you like them or hate them is not the point. I do think one of the challenges we've seen over the past several years is that there's been an algorithmic push on social media that has greatly benefited people who oversimplify geopolitical issues, particularly around Israel. And it ends up in, I'll just put it this way, I got into a debate on my show over Ukraine, in which I was told that it's Israel's fault there's a war in Ukraine, which there's not a connection there. And as you know, for instance, yeah, I've tracked and been following Middle Eastern and foreign affairs for quite a bit in my career. You know, I got started, of course, paying attention to this stuff as a kid with the war in Iraq. And while Israel certainly has its interests pertaining to Syria or Turkey or what, Ukraine is not among them. Ukraine is a natural gas issue pertaining to Russia and Europe. But when you have an oversimplification in media, young people who, you know, I'll explain this a really easy way. I was talking to a guy who was 26, and I mentioned Occupy Wall Street, and he said, I was a little kid when that happened. I was 10 years old, or, you know, I was 13 years old, so I had no idea what was going on. So you have young people now in their 20s who have just started to get into the issues of foreign affairs, and they're being given an oversimplified version fed to them because the algorithm on social media sites promotes it. And then they become attached to this worldview, and they generally don't understand, which unfortunately then leads to people voting based on false premises. And it results in, indeed, violence in the streets and an expansion of, or I should say, an exacerbation of anti-Semitism.
Well, thanks so much for making me feel so old, Tim. John, in 2 seconds, when does this end?
Nobody knows. The president and the leadership has said weeks, not months. The worst thing you could do is tell your enemy when you're going to stop so they don't break.
Well said. God bless you both and protect you. Thank you so much for joining me. This was really great.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our NewsNation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.